The stars had never looked so crowded. Admiral Yara Osei stood at the observation deck of the UES Prometheus and stared out into the black. She did not blink. She did not breathe for a long moment. She just looked. Ahead of her, behind her, to her left, to her right. Warships. Hundreds of them, thousands of them. Everywhere she turned, she saw the gray steel hulls of Earth's finest weapons, drifting in tight formation across a stretch of space that had once been empty and silent. 600,000 warships. The number felt impossible. It felt like a mistake. Even Yara, who had spent 40 years in the Earth Navy, who had watched fleets grow from a few hundred patrol ships to something truly terrifying, even she could not fully wrap her mind around what she was seeing. 600,000 warships. All launched within the last 18 months. All armed, all crewed, all ready. The Galactic Council had asked for a demonstration. Humanity had given them one. She heard footsteps behind her. She did not turn around. She already knew who it was. "They are watching us," said Commander Dex Moroku, her second in command. He stepped up beside her and crossed his arms over his chest. He was a tall man, quiet and careful, with a habit of saying things that other people were already thinking, but had not yet spoken out loud. "Every council species has their sensors pointed at us right now. I have seen 17 different diplomatic feeds in the last hour. They are all saying the same thing." "What are they saying?" Yara asked. "That they made a mistake." She almost smiled at that. 3 years ago, the Galactic Council had issued what they called the Meridian Decree. It was a polite name for an ultimatum. Humanity had been expanding too fast, they said, colonizing too many worlds, building too many ships, growing too quickly for a species that had only been a part of galactic civilization for 2 centuries. The Council wanted limits. They wanted checkpoints. They wanted to assign a human ambassador who would have to ask permission before any new human colony ship left the solar system. In short, they wanted to put a leash on humanity. The Earth government had listened carefully to every word. They had nodded. They had thanked the Council for their concern. And then they had gone home and started building. Not slowly. Not quietly. Humanity had never really known how to do anything slowly or quietly when it felt threatened. They had gone home and started building the largest war fleet in the history of the known galaxy. And they had done it in 18 months. And now they were here. 600,000 warships, hanging in the dark between stars. "Admiral," said Dex, "the Council is requesting a communication link." "Open it," she said. The observation window flickered and turned into a screen. On that screen, 12 faces appeared, 12 representatives from 12 different species. The Vreth, who looked like tall gray mantises with silver eyes. The Dawn, who were round and soft, and moved like slow water. The Kalesi, who had 4 arms and skin that changed color with their emotions, and right now their skin was a deep, alarmed purple. Behind them, barely visible, Yara could see that their hands were shaking. Good. The lead representative was High Counselor Veth of the Vreth. He was old, nearly 400 years old by human counting, and he had the calm, careful voice of someone who had never been afraid of anything in his very long life. But today, his silver eyes were a little too wide. "Admiral Osei," he said, "on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must say that this display is unexpected." "Unexpected," she repeated. 600,000 armed vessels represents a military buildup that has no precedent in High Counselor, she said, cutting him off with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who is not afraid. "You presented us with a decree. You told us we were growing too fast. You told us we needed to be controlled. We heard you, and then we showed you what we had already built." Silence on the other end of the link. "You built this in 18 months?" asked one of the Kalesi representatives. His skin went from purple to pale white. "No," Yara said. "We built some of it in 18 months. The rest was already in progress. We began this project 4 years ago, when we first received whispers that the Meridian Decree was being drafted." More silence, longer this time. It was the Dawn representative who finally spoke. His voice was slow and thick and careful. "Admiral, we must ask, this fleet, is it intended as a threat against the Council?" "It is not," she said. "It is intended as an answer. You asked if humanity could be controlled. Here is your answer. We cannot. We do not wish to be. We are not asking for your permission to exist, Counselor. We are informing you of a fact. The screen went dark. The Council had ended the link. Yara turned back to the stars. She could see the fleet stretching out in every direction, a vast forest of steel and fire and human determination, and she felt something warm settle in her chest. But she also felt something else. Something that had been nagging at her for weeks. Something she had not told anyone, not even Dex. Because the truth was, the fleet, all 600,000 ships of it, was not humanity's greatest achievement. It was not even close. The fleet was the distraction. What humanity had actually been building, quietly and carefully and in secret for 30 years, was something the Council had never seen, something no species in the galaxy had ever built, something that made 600,000 warships look like toys. But that was not ready yet. Not quite. Soon. On a planet called New Carthage, which orbited a dim orange star 40 light-years from Earth, a woman named Dr. Selah Vance was standing in the middle of a crater. The crater was not natural. It was not a meteor impact or a volcanic scar. It was a test site. It was about 2 kilometers wide and half a kilometer deep, and the walls of it were made of a dark, glassy material that had once been ordinary rock before something very, very hot had passed through it. Selah was 47 years old. She wore a plain gray coat and plain gray boots, and had the kind of face that people sometimes described as serious, as if she had been born making calculations. Her hair was short and gray at the temples. Her eyes were dark brown and very steady. She looked at the crater. She looked at the readings on her data tablet. She looked at the crater again. "Run it again," she said. Behind her, a young technician named Pol, barely 25, nervous in the way that all young people who worked on classified projects were nervous, tapped a command into his own tablet. "Dr. Vance, we have run it 11 times. The readings are consistent." "Consistent is not the same as correct, Paul. The energy output was 407 times the projected baseline. The spatial distortion lasted for 9 seconds. The field radius was—" "I know what the field radius was," she said quietly. "I was here." She had been here. She had felt it. When the test ran, she had felt something that she had no word for yet. A kind of pulling, like gravity, but sideways, like the air itself was leaning in one direction. And then there had been a sound that was not quite a sound, more like a pressure, a deep hum that she felt in her back teeth and her knees. And then the rock in front of the emitter array had simply ceased to exist. Not exploded, not burned, ceased. And in its place there had been a shimmer, just for a moment, and through that shimmer she had seen something that she still had not told anyone about. Something that her instruments had not recorded, because they were not designed to record it. She had seen stars, different stars, stars in a completely different arrangement than any sky she had ever studied. She had seen another place. "Pack it up," she said. "We are done for today." "But Paul—" "Yes, ma'am." "Send the full data packet to Geneva, mark it Priority Omega, and do not discuss what we saw here with anyone." He nodded. He was smart enough not to ask why. Selah walked back toward the transport that waited at the crater's edge. She walked slowly, because she was thinking. She was always thinking, but right now she was thinking harder than usual, because what she had just done, what they had just proven was possible, changed everything. The fleet in space was impressive. 600,000 warships was a number that made even ancient species step back and reconsider their assumptions. It was a show of strength that no one had expected from a species barely 200 years into interstellar travel. But what Selah's team had just tested in that crater was not a weapon. It was a door. Back on the UES Prometheus, Admiral Osier was reading a message that had just arrived from Geneva. It was encrypted with 7 different layers of military-grade security. She had to use 3 separate authorization codes to open it. When she finally read it, she read it twice, then set down her tablet and looked out at the fleet again. The message was short. It said, "Threshold test successful. Requesting authorization for Phase 2. She authorized it without hesitation. Around her, 600,000 warships drifted quietly in the dark, and the Council watched them with fear in their hearts. And none of them, None of the ancient, wise, powerful species who had built the Galactic Council over thousands of years. None of them had any idea what was actually happening. They were watching the ships. They should have been watching the scientists. There was a species called the Vreth, and they were among the oldest in the galaxy. They had reached the stars before humanity's ancestors had learned to make fire. They had built empires, and watched them fall and built new ones. They had seen 100 younger species rise and stumble, and either grow into something worthy, or burn themselves out before they ever really got started. The Vreth had seen everything, or so they believed. High Counselor Veth, after the communication link with Admiral Osei had ended, stood alone in his private chamber and looked at the data his analysts had sent him. 600,000 warships, hull ratings, weapon classifications, crew counts, drive types. He read it all carefully. He was not a military man, but he had lived long enough to understand military power. Then he read the secondary report, the one that his intelligence division had flagged as unusual. It described a series of energy readings on a human colony world, readings that did not match any known weapon signature, readings that were, according to his analysts, completely unclassifiable. He read that report 3 times. Then he called his senior intelligence officer, a young Vreth named Kel, who was only 120 years old and still had the bright, quick energy of the not yet ancient. "Kel," he said, "what do we know about human scientific programs? Not their military programs, their science." "Very little, High Counselor. They guard their research extremely carefully. We know they have large numbers of laboratories on their colony worlds. We know they invest heavily in physics and energy research. Beyond that, nothing." "Correct." Veth looked at the energy readings from the colony world again. Something in those numbers made his old instincts, the ones that had kept him alive and effective for 4 centuries, feel cold. "Send a diplomatic request to the Earth government," he said. "Ask them to share an overview of their current scientific projects. Frame it as mutual cooperation. They will refuse." "I know," Veth said, "but I want to see how they refuse." How a species refuses a request tells you almost as much as what they are hiding. Kel nodded and left. Veth sat alone and looked at those strange energy readings for a long time. He had lived 400 years. He had seen many things. But he had never seen a young species, barely 2 centuries old in space, build a fleet of 600,000 warships, and then look as though the fleet was not even the most important thing on their minds. That was the thing that frightened him, not the ships. The way the humans did not seem to care about the ships, as if the ships were just the beginning. The message from Geneva arrived at Dr. Selah Vance's personal terminal at 0300 hours, colony time. She was already awake. She was always awake at 0300. She read the message standing at her desk in the dark, a cup of tea growing cold beside her data tablet. The message was short, which meant it was important. Long messages were for bureaucrats and diplomats. Short messages were for people who understood that the less you put in writing, the safer everyone was. It said, "Authorization granted. Phase 2 begins in 30 days. You will have whatever you need." She set down the tablet. She picked up her tea. She drank it even though it was cold. 30 days. She went back to her calculations. Phase 2 was not a small thing. Phase 1 had been 30 years of quiet, careful, intensely secret research into what humanity's best physicists had started calling threshold technology. The name was intentional. A threshold was a doorway, something you crossed to get from one place to another. And that was exactly what threshold technology was, a way to cross a boundary that every other species in the galaxy had always believed was uncrossable. The boundary between here and there. Not faster than light travel. Every spacefaring species had that, in some form or another. Humanity had it too. Their drives were good, not the best in the galaxy, but solid, reliable, and getting better every year. No, threshold technology was something different, something that did not move a ship from one star system to another, something that moved everything. The Vreth had a concept they called the deep structure of space. Most species did, in one form or another. The idea that underneath the visible universe, Underneath the stars and the dark matter and the energy fields and the quantum foam, there was something older, a kind of framework, the bones of reality, if you wanted to be poetic about it, the thing that held all the other things in their places. Every species knew it was there. Every species had tried, at various points in their history, to interact with it. None had succeeded. Sela's team had succeeded. Not fully. Not yet. But the crater on New Carthage was proof that they had touched it. Proof that they could put energy into the deep structure and get a response back. Proof that the thing the rest of the galaxy had always treated as a wall was actually, if you knew how to look, a door. Phase 2 was about building the key. The Galactic Council did not know about Phase 2. They did not know about Phase 1. They did not know about the crater on New Carthage, except as an unusual energy reading that their analysts had flagged, and then mostly set aside because they had other things to worry about, like 600,000 human warships. High Counselor Veth had not set it aside. He had been thinking about it for 2 weeks. He had assigned 3 of his best analysts to look into human scientific activity, and all 3 had come back with the same answer: almost nothing. The humans kept their research locked down so tightly that even the Council's best intelligence resources could not get inside it. That alone was telling. Most young species were careless about security. They were excited about their discoveries and wanted to share them, or they simply had not developed the cultural habit of secrecy around scientific work. But humanity had learned something from their early decades in space. They had learned that information was power, and that power had to be protected. They protected it very, very well. Veth called a private meeting of 3 counselors he trusted most, not the full council. The full council was 12 species, and 12 species meant 12 different sets of interests, and 12 different reasons for things to leak. He called the Dawn representative, whose name was Oru, and the Kalesi representative, whose name was Sarah, and the old hegemonic ambassador from a species called the Grath, who were not officially on the council, but who had been old when the Vreth were young. The 4 of them met in a room with no recording devices. Veth laid out what he knew. "The fleet is real," he said. 600,000 warships, fully armed, fully crewed. We have confirmed this from multiple observation points. It is not an illusion. "We know it is real," said Oru of the Dawn, his thick, slow voice carrying a note of worry that was unusual for his species. "The question is whether it is enough to change the political balance." "It changes nothing politically," said Sarah of the Kalesi. Her skin was orange, the Kalesi color of calculation. "A fleet is a deterrent. It prevents us from doing things we might otherwise do. It does not grant humanity any new rights under council law." "That is a very careful reading of the situation," said the Grath ambassador. He was ancient, and his voice was like stone on stone. "Too careful. You are looking at what the law says, and not at what is actually happening." "What is actually happening," Veth said, "is that humanity built this fleet not to use it, but to show it. And they are not paying attention to it the way a species should pay attention to 600,000 warships." Silence. "Explain," said the Grath ambassador. "When we spoke with Admiral Osei, she was calm. Completely calm. Not the calm of someone who is confident in their weapons. The calm of someone who knows that the weapons are not the point." More silence. Then Sarah's skin shifted from orange to pale yellow, the Kalesi color of unease. "You think they have something else," she said. "I think they have something else," Veth confirmed. "What?" "That is what I do not know, and that is why I called this meeting." On New Carthage, the construction teams worked around the clock. They were building something that had no name yet in any official document. Selah had insisted on that. Names gave things a shape, and she did not want the shape of this thing to be fixed until it was finished. For now, her teams called it the frame, which was accurate enough. It was, in the most literal sense, a frame, a structure, a boundary made of physical matter that enclosed a specific volume of space and could, when powered correctly, do something to that volume of space that had never been done before in the galaxy's long history. The frame was enormous, 40 kilometers across. It was built from an alloy that had taken 12 years to develop, dense and stable enough to survive the stresses of what it would be asked to contain, yet flexible in ways that standard metals were not. The construction required 3,000 engineers and twice as many automated systems, and it had been going on for 6 years, and Sayla had never once allowed a single photograph of it to be taken by any device that was connected to any external network. She stood at the edge of the construction site now and watched the work with the same quiet intensity she brought to everything. Paul walked up beside her. He was less nervous than he used to be. Working with Sayla for long enough did that to people. Either you absorbed her steadiness, or you burned out and went home. Paul had absorbed it. Phase 2 authorization is confirmed, she told him. We have 30 days. 30 days to finish the frame? No, the frame will be finished in 11 days. 30 days to run the full activation sequence. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the frame. It was hard to look at it and not feel something. The sheer size of it, the precision of it, the way it seemed to hum with potential, even when it was not powered. If this works, he said slowly, the fleet becomes irrelevant. Not irrelevant, Sayla said. The fleet is still important. The fleet is what keeps the Council from doing anything foolish in the next 30 days. But yes, if this works, the fleet becomes the least impressive thing humanity has ever built. Paul looked at the frame again. He looked at it for a long time. Are you afraid? He asked. It was a question he would not have dared ask 2 years ago. Sayla considered it seriously, because she considered everything seriously. No, she said. I am careful. There is a difference. Fear makes you slow. Care makes you thorough. He nodded. She went back to watching the construction. The Council's response to the fleet had been slower than humanity expected. Admiral Osei had anticipated demands, negotiations, possibly even some kind of blockade attempt. Instead, the Council had gone very quiet. Quiet was, in some ways, more worrying. She was in her command center, reviewing patrol patterns and supply chains, when Dex came to her with an intelligence report. He set it on the table in front of her with the careful, deliberate gesture of someone who was not sure how the recipient was going to react. She picked it up. She read it. It was a transcript of a communication intercepted between a Vreth intelligence vessel and its home base. The translation was rough. Vreth encryption was good, but the meaning was clear enough. The Vreth were not worried about the fleet. They were worried about what was on New Carthage. She looked at Dex. He looked at her. How much do they know? She asked. Almost nothing. Energy readings. Unusual construction activity. They have a name for it in this intercept. They are calling it the anomaly. The anomaly, she repeated. She almost smiled. They are not wrong about that. Should we inform Geneva? Geneva already knows. This is why the fleet is here, Dex. Not to fight the Council, to make sure the Council is looking at us. She tapped the report. And they still are. The Vreth are worried about New Carthage, but they have not yet understood what they are actually looking at. By the time they do, it will not matter. Dex sat down across from her. He was quiet for a moment. Admiral, he said, I have served with you for 11 years. You have never told me exactly what is happening on New Carthage. I have not asked, because you would have told me if you thought I needed to know. But we are 30 days from something. I can feel it. The whole fleet can feel it. Something is about to happen that is bigger than the fleet, and I would like to be ready for it. She looked at him for a long moment, then she made a decision. Sit down, she said. I am going to tell you a story about a physicist named Sela Vance, and a crater on a colony world, and a door. He sat. She told him. By the time she finished, the stars outside the observation window had shifted slightly as the fleet maintained its slow patrol pattern, and Dex was very, very quiet. A door, he said at last. A door. To where? Sela's own words came back to her. She had asked Sela that question directly, during their last communication, and Sela had given her the same answer she now gave Dex. Everywhere, she said. Anywhere. Everywhere humanity needs to go, and nowhere the Council can follow. Not yet. Maybe not ever, if we do this right. Dex looked out at the fleet. 600,000 ships, and behind them, 30 light-years away, a 40-kilometer frame that hummed with potential and was almost ready. How long have they been planning this? He asked. Since before you and I were born, Yara said. since before most of the people alive today were born. 30 years of work, 30 years of silence, 30 years of building something the galaxy has never seen. She looked at the stars too. And in 30 days, the galaxy will see it. Day 15 of Phase 2. The frame was finished. It stood in the open air of New Carthage's northern continent, a massive ring of engineered alloy that rose 40 kilometers into the sky, like a monument to something that did not yet have a name. The local wildlife had learned to avoid it, not because it was active, not because it hummed or glowed or gave off any radiation that animal senses could detect, but because animals were often smarter than they seemed, and something about the frame simply felt wrong to them in the way that very large and very unnatural things sometimes do. Dr. Selah Vance found that detail interesting. She had made a note of it in her personal journal, which was one of only 2 places she allowed herself to write things that were not fully scientific. The journal, and letters to her sister on Earth, which she encrypted herself using a system she had designed, because she trusted no one else's encryption on matters that were close to her heart. She stood now in the control center that her team had built, 600 meters from the frame's edge. The center was buried 12 meters underground, because the activation sequence was going to produce energies that no one fully understood yet, and Selah preferred to be behind a lot of rock when things happened that no one fully understood. Around her, 43 scientists and engineers were at their stations. They were the best humanity had, not the most famous. Most of them were completely unknown outside of their own field, because 30 years of security protocols had kept their work out of any public record. But they were the best. Selah had made sure of that. Pol was at the primary monitoring station. He looked calm. He had learned from her. "Status," she said. "All subsystems green. Power draw is at 62% of projected maximum. The resonance coils are synchronized to 9 decimal places. 9 is not 10. No, but our models suggest 9 is sufficient for stable initiation. 10 is what we would want for a second attempt, if the first one fails. I know. Keep working toward 10. Yes, ma'am." She turned back to her own screen. The numbers on it were beautiful in the way that only numbers that meant something important could be beautiful. Not aesthetically, they were just numbers. But what they described was beautiful. What they described was humanity putting its hand into the bones of reality and asking a question that no one had ever asked before. The question was, what is on the other side? High Counselor Veth received the intelligence report on the same day that Selah's team hit 62% power draw. His analysts had finally managed to get a sensor drone close enough to New Carthage's northern continent to take readings. The drone had been disguised as a piece of debris. Vreth intelligence was good at that sort of thing. It had coasted in on a slow trajectory that took 18 days and required no active drive signature. It had taken readings for 6 hours before its systems overheated, and it burned up in the planet's atmosphere. 6 hours was enough. The readings were extraordinary. Not the frame itself. The frame was massive, but it was just a structure. Metal and alloy. Interesting engineering, but not alarming in itself. It was the energy readings that alarmed him. The power draw his drone had detected was unlike anything in his analyst's reference database. Not bigger than known systems. It was not a matter of scale. It was different in kind. The energy signature did not match any known drive type, weapon type, shield type, or industrial process. It did not match anything. His chief analyst, a Vreth named Meth, who had 40 years of experience reading energy signatures, had written a single line at the bottom of her report. "I do not know what this is." Veth read that line 3 times. Meth had never written those words in 40 years of service. He called an emergency session of his private group, Oru, Sarah, and the Grath ambassador. "We need to act," he said. He put the report on the table. He did not summarize it. He let them read it themselves. The Grath ambassador read it slowest, because he read everything slowly, weighing every word. When he finished, he looked up. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Unknown, but the power draw is increasing. Whatever they are building toward is not finished. There is still time." "Time to do what?" asked Sarah of the Khaleesi. Her skin was gray, the color of something Khaleesi called cold thinking, the kind of thought that had no emotion in it at all. "To act, to send a fleet to New Carthage." to insist on an inspection of whatever they are building. And if they refuse? Asked Oru. No one answered for a moment. They have 600,000 warships, Sarah said finally. If we send a fleet to New Carthage, they will treat it as an act of war. If we do not, Veth said, we may be allowing them to do something that changes the balance of power in this galaxy permanently, something we will not be able to undo. The Grath ambassador, old, slow, ancient, put his large hands flat on the table and looked at each of them in turn. I have lived a very long time, he said. I have seen many young species reach a moment like this, a moment where they are about to do something that all the older species thought was impossible, and I have learned one thing very clearly from watching those moments. What is that? Veth asked. That trying to stop them always makes it worse. Silence. You are suggesting we do nothing, Veth said. I am suggesting that we do not make enemies of them. The Grath ambassador rose from the table. He was very tall when he stood. Send the fleet if you want. But ask yourself first, what happens if they succeed anyway? You will have given them every reason to remember that you tried to stop them, and they will be very, very powerful by then. He left. The three remaining counselors looked at each other. No one gave an order to send a fleet. On day 22, Sayla's team hit 91% power draw. The frame was doing things that her instruments struggled to record. The air inside the ring was behaving strangely, not in any visible way, not yet. But the sensor readings showed micro-variations in gravitational constant, tiny fluctuations in the local speed of light, the kind of changes that were so small, they should have been unmeasurable, but were becoming measurable, because the frame was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was touching the deep structure, not opening it, not yet, but touching it, pressing against it, asking. Sayla sat at her station and watched the numbers, and felt something she rarely let herself feel during work: excitement. She had been doing science for 27 years. She had started as a theoretical physicist at a university on Earth, writing papers about things that could not be tested, because the technology to test them did not exist. She had been recruited into the Threshold program 8 years in, when her papers had attracted the attention of people whose names she had not known until she signed the documents that made her one of the most important and least famous human beings alive. For 20 years she had worked in secret. For 20 years she had pushed against a problem that every other species in the galaxy had looked at and then turned away from, because it was too hard, too strange, too far outside what known physics suggested was possible. The numbers on her screen said she had been right. Not just close, right. The deep structure was real. It was there, and it was responding. Admiral OCE received a communication from the Council on day 23. It was not the aggressive, demanding communication she had been half expecting. It was surprisingly gentle. High Counselor Veth himself was on the link, and he looked, she realized with some surprise, tired, old, not threatening, just old. Admiral, he said, I would like to speak with you privately, not as a negotiation, not as an ultimatum, just as one person who is worried to another person who might have answers. She looked at him for a moment, then she nodded to Dex to leave the room. Speak, she said. What is happening on New Carthage? She was quiet for a moment. She thought about what to say. Something that has never been done before. That much I know. I am asking what it is. She looked at him. He looked at her. He was 400 years old, and he had the eyes of someone who had seen too much to be easily frightened, but who was frightened now. High Counselor, she said, in 8 days, you are going to see it for yourself. The whole galaxy is. I think at that point, your question will be answered in a way that no words I say today could match. He was quiet. Is it a weapon? He asked. His voice was very careful. No, she said. And then, because she felt the weight of his worry, and because she was not a cruel person, she added, it is a door, and humanity intends to share it, in time, with species that deal with us as equals. The link was quiet for a long moment. A door, Veth said finally. To where? She thought of Sayla's answer. Everywhere, she said. He ended the link. She could not read what he was thinking, but she thought, watching the screen go dark, that he might be beginning to understand something. Not the physics, he would never understand the physics, but the shape of what was about to happen, the size of it, the fact that the galaxy was 8 days away from never being the same again. Day 28, 2 days before the scheduled activation. Paul came to Scylla's station at 0600 with a data tablet and an expression she had never seen on him before. She had seen him nervous. She had seen him excited. She had never seen him looking like someone who had just solved a problem they had not expected to solve. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the tablet. She looked at the numbers. She looked at them again. "When did this happen?" "About 40 minutes ago. The resonance coils hit 10 decimal places of synchronization. We did not push them. They got there on their own." She looked up from the tablet. She looked at the ceiling, which was 12 meters of rock, above which was 600 meters of open air, above which was the frame, 40 kilometers of alloy and engineering, and 30 years of human stubbornness. "The frame is synchronizing itself," she said. "That is what the data suggests, yes. That is not in any of our models." "No." He paused. "Dr. Vance, I think the deep structure is pulling on it. I think it is responding to us." She looked at the numbers again, then she put the tablet down. "Move the activation up," she said. "We go in 24 hours. The morning of the activation was clear on New Carthage. This was unusual. The planet's northern continent was known for heavy cloud cover, thick gray banks of cloud that moved fast and low across the plains where the frame stood. But on the morning of day 29, the sky was open and pale and empty from one horizon to the other, and the sun came up orange gold and lit the frame like a crown. Scylla noticed this. She did not say anything about it, but she noticed. Her team had been awake for 36 hours. She had told them to rest in shifts, and they had tried, but no one really rested. They sat at their stations or walked the corridors of the underground control center, or stood outside in the early morning air and looked at the frame and thought about what they were about to do. What they were about to do was open a hole in reality. Not a large hole, not yet. The first activation was designed to be controlled, a small breach, lasting no more than 30 seconds, in a specific point inside the frame's ring. A test, in the strictest sense, not a demonstration, not a deployment, a test. But a test that, if it worked, would be the most important moment in human history since the invention of language. Scylla was at her station, at 0545. The activation was scheduled for 0700. She used the time to check the numbers one more time, and then again, and then a third time. Paul sat beside her. He did not ask questions. He watched his own screens. At 0650, Scylla opened a communication link to Geneva. The Secretary General of Earth was on the other end, a quiet, compact woman named Adela Hart, who had the habit of listening more than she spoke, and who had been one of the project's strongest supporters for 12 years. "We are on schedule," Scylla said. "I know," Hart said. "I have been watching the feeds all night. Is there anything you want to say before we begin?" Hart was quiet for a moment. "Do good work, Scylla. That is all." The link closed. At 0658, Scylla looked at her team. 43 people. 43 human beings who had spent the better part of their careers doing something that the rest of the galaxy thought was impossible. "Any last questions?" she asked. No one spoke. "Good." She turned to her controls. "Beginning activation sequence." 600 meters above, inside the frame's ring, nothing visible happened at first. The instruments saw it before any eye could. A trembling in the local gravitational field, a microsecond stutter in the speed of light. A sound that was not a sound, a frequency too low for human hearing, felt rather than heard. A deep sub-bass pressure that moved through the rock and the earth, and the bones of every person in the control center. Then the air inside the ring began to change. It did not glow. That was the first surprise. Every model they had built had predicted some form of visible radiation during the breach event, but there was no glow. Instead, the air inside the ring became still, completely, absolutely still, not calm, still, as if it had stopped existing as air and become something else. Something more like a surface, something that caught the morning light and held it instead of letting it pass through. The surface rippled, once, like a stone dropped in deep water, and then it opened. Paul was the first person to see the other side. He was watching the primary camera feed, and he stopped breathing for 3 full seconds when the image came through. He was not looking at New Carthage's sky. He was not looking at any sky that he recognized. He was looking at a place where the stars were different. Not just arranged differently, different stars, different distances, different light. A sky that no human eye had ever seen before because it was somewhere else, somewhere outside the galaxy, or deep inside it, or adjacent to it, in a direction that existing physics had no name for. The thinner and in front of those different stars, barely visible, was something even stranger. A structure, made of something that was not metal, and was not stone, and was not any material that human science had ever catalogued. Old, impossibly old, built by hands, or something like hands, that had existed when the galaxy itself was young. No one in the control center made a sound. The breach held for 32 seconds, then Sela closed it with 3 keystrokes, precise and calm, and the air inside the frame went back to being air, and the morning light came back, and New Carthage's clear sky was just a sky again. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Pole said, very quietly, "Dr. Vance." "I saw it," she said. "The structure. I saw it. What is it?" She looked at her screens. The data from the 32 seconds was already being processed, already being analyzed, already generating more questions than answers. She looked at the numbers and she thought about the structure she had seen. Old beyond imagining. Built by something that was gone now, silent and waiting in a place that was not quite anywhere. Something that was here before us, she said. Something that left a door, and we just found the key. Admiral Osei received the message from New Carthage at 0803. She read it standing in her command center, surrounded by the controlled noise of 600,000 ships' worth of operational data. She read it twice. Then she stood straight and looked out at the stars. Dex appeared at her elbow. "It worked," she said. He let out a breath. "Then we need to tell the council." "Not yet. Sela needs 48 hours to analyze the data from the first activation. We will tell the council when we have something to show them, not just something to tell them." She went back to her screens. There was a lot to do. The fleet still had to be maintained, still had to be supplied, still had to look exactly as threatening and immovable as it had looked for the past month. The council was still watching. The council could not know, not yet, that the thing they had been worrying about was already done. But she let herself, just for a moment, feel the size of it. Humanity had done it. Not the fleet. The fleet was steel and guns and the kind of strength that every species understood. What humanity had done on New Carthage was something different. Something that the Vreth, with their 400 years, had never managed. Something the ancient Grath, who had watched empires rise and fall for millennia, had never imagined a young species could achieve. They had touched the deep structure of the universe, and it had answered. They had opened a door to somewhere no one had ever gone. And behind that door, waiting in the dark of a place that had no name yet, something had been built a very long time ago, by a species that no longer existed. Something that was still there, still waiting. Yara Osei was not a scientist. She was a soldier, and an admiral, and a practical person who believed in things she could see and touch and count. But standing on the observation deck of the UES Prometheus, looking at 600,000 warships and knowing what was happening on New Carthage, she felt something that she could not quite put a name to. It was the feeling of being part of something that mattered, not just to humanity, to everything. High Counselor Veth was in his private office when his instruments detected the event. He did not have a camera feed from inside the frame. He did not have the readings that Sela's team was poring over in their underground control center. What he had was a sensor network that covered most of the known galaxy, maintained at enormous expense by the Vreth Intelligence Division, and that sensor network had just flagged something on New Carthage that was outside every parameter his analysts had ever set as a boundary for the possible. He looked at the readings for a long time. Then he called Kel. Something happened on New Carthage 30 minutes ago, he said. I need a full analysis. We are already running it, Kel said. His voice was strained. High Counselor, I need to tell you what I think happened, even though I am not certain, because I think you need to hear it before the analysis is finished. Tell me. I think they opened a hole in space, not through space, in it. Through the substrate, the deep structure. Veth was quiet. And something was on the other side, Kel said. More quiet. Long quiet. You are certain? No, I am not certain of anything right now. Our sensors were not designed to detect this kind of event, but the readings are consistent with a localized failure of spatial continuity, which means yes, I believe there was a physical aperture into a space that is not connected to our known universe. And if that is true, then the Meridian Decree, Veth said slowly, means nothing. Yes, High Counselor. Veth sat in his office for a very long time after that. He had lived 400 years. He had seen species rise and fall. He had seen wars and alliances and betrayals, and moments of such genuine beauty that they had stayed with him for centuries. He had seen many things. He had never seen a young species do what humanity had apparently just done. He thought about the Meridian Decree. He thought about the Galactic Council and its ancient, careful rules and its long institutional memory, and its deep, sincere belief that the galaxy could be managed if the right species were in charge of managing it. He thought about Admiral Oca standing in front of 600,000 warships and looking calm, not confident in her weapons. Calm in the way of someone who knows the weapons are not the point. He had been right to worry about that. He had not been worried enough. On New Carthage, in the underground control center, the team that had just changed the galaxy was eating sandwiches and drinking coffee, and arguing about what the structure they had seen through the aperture actually was. This was normal. This was how scientists processed enormous things. They took them apart and argued about the pieces. It was healthier than trying to hold the enormous thing all at once. Sela ate her sandwich and listened to the arguments, and thought about something else entirely. She was thinking about the 32 seconds of data, not what they had seen visually, what the instruments had recorded, and specifically, she was thinking about a reading in the last 8 seconds of the aperture that had not fit her models at all, not the structure. The structure was old and interesting and enormously significant, but it was a thing, and things could be studied at whatever pace was necessary. What she was thinking about was a signal, faint, buried in the sensor data, easy to miss if you were not looking for it, but she had been looking for everything, because that was how she worked, and she had found it. A repeating pattern. 6 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause, 6 pulses again. Mathematical, deliberate, coming from the direction of the structure. Something in that place knew the door had opened. Something had said hello. Sela put down her sandwich. She picked up her tablet. She started working. The signal took 47 hours to decode. Sela did not sleep during those 47 hours. She tried, twice, stretched out on a cot in the break room with a blanket over her, and her eyes closed, but her mind would not stop. It kept pulling her back to the numbers, to the pattern, to the question of what those pulses meant, and who, or what, had sent them. The 636 rhythm was the first thing her team cracked. Mathematics, they were almost certain, was universal. Any intelligence sophisticated enough to build what they had seen through the aperture was sophisticated enough to understand that base patterns were a language anyone could learn. 6, 3, 6. She had a team on the mathematical angle within the first 6 hours. The harder part was everything else. The layered frequencies beneath the basic pulse pattern, the way the signal shifted in specific intervals that suggested something more complex than a simple greeting. The encoding system that was unlike anything in any database of known languages or transmission methods. They broke it by accident, the way many of the best discoveries happened. A young physicist named Amma, who was 26 and had been on the project for only 8 months, and therefore had not yet learned all the assumptions that experience sometimes builds into a person's thinking, looked at the signal from what she later called the wrong angle, and saw it correctly. She came to Sela at 0300 on the second night with her tablet and a look on her face that Sela recognized, the look of someone who has found something so significant that they have not yet decided whether to be excited or frightened. The signal is not a message, Amma said. It is an instruction set. Sela looked at the analysis on the tablet. She read it carefully. She read it again. An instruction set for what? For the frame, for how to use it properly. Whoever built the structure on the other side, they knew the aperture would be opened eventually. They left directions, decades ago, maybe longer. They have been transmitting this signal continuously, into the deep structure, waiting for someone to open the door and pick it up. Sela looked at the tablet for a long time. That means they anticipated us, she said. Yes. Or something like us. Yes. She put down the tablet. She looked at the ceiling again. 12 meters of rock, 600 meters of air, and above that, the frame. Wake the full team, she said. All of them. We are going back to work. 48 hours after the first activation, Admiral Osei opened a communication link to the Galactic Council. All 12 species were present. This was unusual. Normally, a full council session took days to arrange, but Veth had called them all together, and somehow they had all come. And they were all watching the screen with the particular attention of people who know something important is about to happen, and are not entirely sure they are ready for it. Thank you all for joining on short notice, Osei said. She was in the UES Prometheus observation deck. Behind her, the fleet was visible through the window. 600,000 ships, still in formation, still exactly as impressive as they had been a month ago. We have a demonstration to share with you, she said. She nodded to an aide off-screen. The main display switched from her image to a camera feed from New Carthage. The council representatives could see the northern plain, the clear sky, the frame standing enormous and quiet in the morning light. Sela's voice came over the audio link, calm and precise as always. Beginning second activation. Full power, extended duration. Breach target, 20 minutes. On the council screens, the air inside the frame began to change. And this time, perhaps because the power was higher, perhaps because of something the instruction set had told them, perhaps because the thing on the other side was ready, it happened differently. There was light, not harsh or blinding. A gentle light, pale and steady, coming from within the ring as the air inside it stopped being air, and became a surface, and then became a window to somewhere else. The other stars appeared on the council's screens, and the structure was visible again, larger this time, more detailed, recognizable now as something that had been deliberately built by intelligence. And this time, the signal was visible too, not just to instruments, to eyes. Inside the frame, on the surface of the aperture, patterns of light moved. The same 636 rhythm, but rendered in light now, visible to anyone watching. And beneath it, more complex patterns. The instruction set, displayed openly, as if the thing that had left it wanted to make sure there was no confusion about what it was. The council was silent. Sela's voice again. We have decoded the signal. It is an instruction set for operating the frame, for building more frames, for stabilizing permanent apertures, and for navigation within the deep structure network. A pause. There is a network, she continued. The deep structure is not empty. There are nodes, points of connection. We have not yet mapped them all. That will take years. But we can see from the data that there are at least several hundred accessible nodes within our galaxy. Each node is, as far as we can tell, connected to one of these structures. These were not built by the same species that built our frame. Our frame is new, built by us. These were built by something much older, something that seeded the galaxy with connection points and then left, or was lost, long before recorded history. Another pause. The instruction set includes access protocols. We can use the nodes. We can go anywhere in the galaxy, any of these nodes, without conventional travel, without time delays, without passing through anyone else's territory, or asking anyone's permission. The implications of that last sentence settled over the council like snow. Veth was the first to speak. The Meridian Decree, he said. His voice was very quiet. Is no longer relevant to us, Osei said, not unkindly, simply as a fact. You wanted to limit our expansion. We understand why. You have watched young species before, and some of them have expanded in ways that caused harm. We understand that concern, but the answer to that concern was never going to be limiting us. The answer is trust, and trust has to be earned on both sides. She paused. We are not going to leave the council. We are not going to declare war on anyone. We are not going to use this technology to threaten or conquer. That is not what we are. We have 600,000 warships, and we have built a door between worlds, and in 30 years of working toward this, we never once considered using it as a weapon. That should tell you something about humanity. Veth looked at her. He looked old, tired, 400 years of certainty shifting under him. What do you want from us? He asked. To be treated as what we are, not a young species to be managed, a civilization that reached something you never reached, and is willing, genuinely willing, to share it. On the screen, the aperture inside the frame held steady. The light patterns moved. The other stars burned quietly in the window. The debate in the council lasted 3 days. Sayla was not involved in it. She was busy working through the instruction set and trying to build a preliminary map of the deep structure network. She left that work to Pol and Emma and went for a walk. She walked out of the underground center and across the plain and sat down 100 meters from the frame's edge. She had never sat this close to it before. During construction and testing, the safety perimeter had always kept everyone back, but the frame was quiet now, between activations, and the plane was empty, and she needed to think. The frame was huge from here. Looking up at it from the ground, it filled most of the sky. She could see where the alloy had darkened slightly during the activations, the way metal darkens when something very hot or very strange has been near it. She thought about the species that had built the structure on the other side. She thought about them a lot, who they were, what they had wanted, why they had seeded the galaxy with connection points, and left instructions and then disappeared. She did not have answers yet. She might not have answers for decades, but she thought about it. She thought that maybe they had done this because they knew what every truly advanced civilization eventually learns, that the universe is very large and very old, and that isolation is the real danger, not war. Not competition, isolation, the tendency of each species to look inward, to see the universe as something to be controlled and limited and divided into safe pieces, rather than something to be explored together. Maybe the network had been built to make isolation impossible. Maybe it had been built to force every species that reached it to make a choice, share it, or lose access to it entirely. Sayla did not know, but she thought it was a good guess. She sat by the frame and watched the sky and thought. The council's decision came on the 3rd day. It was not unanimous. Nothing with 12 species ever was. The Khaleesi and the Dawn voted immediately in favor of ending the Meridian Decree and opening formal negotiations with humanity about joint access to the deep structure network. 3 smaller species followed. The Vreth took longer. Veth himself abstained, which was unusual, though Kel later told Osei that he suspected Veth had been in favor and had simply not wanted to be seen leading the charge. The Meridian Decree was suspended. Not formally revoked, that required a longer process, but suspended, which meant the same thing for all practical purposes. Osei received the news at her command station. She read it, set it aside, and went back to managing the fleet's supply lines, which were getting complicated after a month in deep space. Dex found her an hour later. "You do not seem very excited," he said. "I am very excited," she said. "I am also very busy. We have 600,000 ships that need fuel and food and maintenance, and we need to start rotating crews home." He laughed. It was a rare sound from him. The galaxy changes forever, and you are worried about crew rotations. Someone has to be. She looked up at him. The galaxy changing forever is Sela 2019's department. Crew rotations are mine. Both matter. He sat down across from her. What happens next, really? After the negotiations and the politics, what actually happens next? She thought about it seriously, because she took questions seriously. "We go," she said. "That is what happens next. We build more frames. We map the network. We find every node and we go to it, and we find out what is there. Some of the other species will come with us. Eventually. Some will be too afraid. But we will go. That is what humanity does." She looked out at the fleet. The ships are still important. Space is still big, and most of it does not have network nodes. We will still need engines and drives, and all the ordinary work of getting from one place to another. But now we also have the door, and the door leads everywhere. And the thing that built the network on the other side? Dex asked. The structure, the signal. Whatever left those instructions. Are we going to try to find them? She looked at him. Of course we are, she said, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. That is the whole point, isn't 2019-28. 3 months after the first activation, the second frame was ready. It was built on a different world, farther out, in a part of human space that the Council had never quite gotten around to monitoring closely. It was smaller than the original frame on New Carthage. Sella's team had learned from the first build. Smaller, faster, cheaper, more stable. The third frame was started the week the second one came online. The instruction set turned out to be comprehensive enough that Sela estimated they could eventually build frames on any solid surface in any star system. The process required specific materials and a specific power source, and a level of engineering precision that was challenging but achievable. In 5 years, she thought, with full industrial mobilization, humanity could have hundreds of frames. In 20 years, maybe thousands. The Council representatives who came to observe the second frame's activation stood very quietly through the whole process. They watched the aperture open. They watched the other stars appear. They listened to Sela describe what was being seen and recorded. Veth was among them. He stood near the back of the observation group, very still, watching with his silver eyes. After it was over, after the aperture closed and the frame went quiet, and Sela's team started their analysis, he walked over to where Sela was standing and stopped in front of her. He was very tall, as Vreth were. She was not particularly short, but she had to look up at him. "Dr. Vance," he said. "High Counselor." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the frame. "My species has been in space for 3,000 years, he said. "We have studied physics for most of that time. We looked at the deep structure. Many of our best minds looked at it. And we decided it was a wall. We called it a natural limit. We built our understanding of the galaxy around the assumption that it could not be crossed." He looked down at her. "You have been in space for 200 years, and you crossed it in 30. She met his gaze. "We believed it could be done," she said. "That is what I am trying to understand." His voice was thoughtful, not resentful. Genuinely trying to understand. "Why did you believe that? What made humans look at an impossible problem and believe it was possible?" She thought about it. She thought about her childhood, about the books she had read and the teachers who had pushed her, and the history of her species. A species that had nearly destroyed itself a dozen times, and kept going, kept building, kept reaching for the next thing. A species that had a deep and sometimes irrational stubbornness about the word impossible. Because someone told us it wasn't 2019, she said. And because even before that, even without anyone telling us, we had a habit of not believing in walls. Every wall we have ever run into, we have gone over it or under it or through it. It is not always smart. It has gotten us into a lot of trouble over the centuries. But it is who we are. Veth looked at her for a long time. Then, very slowly, he nodded. "The Council," he said, "would like to discuss formal partnership in the Deep Structure Network Research Program. Full scientific sharing, equal access, no limits on human expansion in exchange for Council participation in the exploration of the nodes." Sela looked at him. She thought about the 30 years of secrecy. She thought about the crater on New Carthage, and Pol's young face when he first saw the numbers, and Amma finding the instruction set from the wrong angle. She thought about the signal. 6 pulses, pause. 3 pulses, pause. 6 pulses again, waiting in the dark for someone to open the door. "Talk to Admiral Osei about the political side," she said. "That is her job. But scientifically, yes, we welcome collaboration. The network is not ours to hoard." He nodded again. He turned and walked back toward the Council observers. She turned back to her frame. There was more work to do. There was always more work to do. The instruction set still had sections she had not fully decoded. The preliminary network map showed at least 300 nodes, and they had only visited one. There was a structure in a place that had no name yet, built by something ancient and gone, and it had said hello, and she intended to say hello back. She picked up her tablet. She started working. Behind her, the frame stood quiet in the afternoon light of a colony world that had once been just a dot on a star chart, and was now the most important place in the known galaxy. 40 kilometers of human stubbornness, built in the shape of a ring. A door, ready to open. And beyond it, as vast and old and full of things not yet understood, as the universe had always been, waiting not for the strongest species, not for the oldest or the wisest or the most warlike, but for the one that refused to accept that there were walls, was everything. Humanity had unleashed 600,000 warships, but that had only been the beginning. The real power had just awakened, and the universe would never be the same.